The Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling recently, upholding the federal government's obligation to provide adequate healthcare funding for Native American tribes. This decision has profound implications for the health and well-being of indigenous communities across the United States. It reaffirms the government's treaty responsibilities and underscores the importance of equitable access to healthcare for all citizens. The ruling stems from a long-standing legal battle over the Indian Health Service, a federal agency responsible for providing healthcare to Native Americans. Tribes have long argued that the IHS is chronically underfunded, resulting in inadequate care and significant health disparities compared to the general population. This landmark decision validates those claims and paves the way for increased funding and improved health outcomes for Native Americans. The Supreme Court's decision sends a strong message about the government's commitment to honoring its treaty obligations. The Supreme Court's majority opinion rested firmly on the legal foundation of treaty rights and the federal government's trust responsibility to Native American tribes. The court recognized the historical context of these treaties, which were signed during a period of westward expansion and displacement of indigenous peoples. In exchange for ceding vast territories, Native American tribes were promised certain benefits and protections by the federal government, including health care. Writing for the majority, Justice emphasized the solemn nature of these treaties and the government's enduring obligation to fulfill its promises. The court rejected arguments that sought to diminish or reinterpret the government's responsibilities, asserting that treaty obligations must be upheld in both letter and spirit. The majority opinion also highlighted the federal government's unique trust responsibility to Native American tribes. This trust responsibility stems from the recognition that tribes are sovereign nations with a government-to-government relationship with the United States. The court affirmed that this relationship carries with it a special obligation to protect tribal interests, including the health and well-being of their citizens. Furthermore, the court rejected arguments that funding for Native American healthcare should be subject to the same political processes as other government programs. The justices recognized that treaty rights and the trust responsibility are not contingent upon annual appropriations or the whims of changing political tides. They asserted that these obligations are fundamental to the relationship between the United States and Native American tribes and must be upheld consistently. While the Supreme Court's ruling was hailed as a victory by many tribal leaders and advocates for Native American healthcare, the decision was not without its critics. The dissenting opinions, while acknowledging the importance of treaty rights, raised concerns about the ruling's potential implications for federalism and the separation of powers. Justice, in his dissent, argued that the majority opinion overstepped the bounds of the judiciary by effectively dictating spending priorities to Congress. He maintained that while the court has a role in interpreting treaties and upholding the government's obligations, it should not infringe upon the legislative branch's authority to allocate funds. The dissenting justices also expressed concerns about the ruling's potential to create a slippery slope, leading to increased judicial intervention in matters traditionally left to the political branches. They argued that such an expansion of judicial power could undermine democratic principles and create uncertainty in the law. Moreover, the dissenters questioned the practicality of enforcing the court's decision. They pointed to the complexities of the federal budget process and the difficulty of compelling Congress to allocate specific funding levels for Native American healthcare. While acknowledging the importance of the government's obligations to tribes, the dissenting justices maintained that the court's ruling provided an unrealistic solution to a complex problem. To fully grasp the significance of the Supreme Court's decision, it's crucial to understand the historical context of Native American healthcare policy, particularly the landmark Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act of 1975. This legislation marked a turning point in the relationship between the federal government and Native American tribes, shifting away from paternalistic policies and toward self-governance. The Indian Self-Determination Act recognized the inherent right of tribes to manage their own affairs, including health care. It provided tribes with the option to assume control of programs and services previously administered by the federal government, including those operated by the Indian Health Service, or IHS. This shift towards self-determination aimed to empower tribes and improve the quality of services provided to their communities. However, Despite the promise of self-determination, the IHS has remained chronically underfunded. While the Indian Self-Determination Act allowed tribes to take control of healthcare delivery, it did not guarantee adequate funding to meet the needs of their communities. This chronic underfunding has resulted in persistent health disparities between Native Americans and the general population. The Supreme Court's recent decision can be seen as an affirmation of the principles enshrined in the Indian Self-Determination Act. By upholding the government's obligation to provide adequate healthcare funding, the court is, in essence, supporting the ability of tribes to exercise their right to self-governance in the realm of healthcare. The ruling recognizes that true self-determination requires not only the authority to manage programs, but also the resources to ensure their effectiveness. The Supreme Court's ruling has the potential to significantly impact the health and well-being of Native American communities across the United States. Increased funding for the Indian Health Service could lead to improved access to quality healthcare, potentially reducing the stark health disparities that have plagued indigenous populations for generations. With increased funding, the IHS could expand its service delivery capacity, recruit and retain more healthcare professionals, and invest in critical infrastructure improvements. This could translate into shorter wait times for appointments, expanded access to specialty care, and improved prevention and treatment programs for chronic diseases. Moreover, the ruling could empower tribes to further embrace the principles of self-determination in healthcare. With greater financial resources, tribes could choose to expand existing IHS facilities, establish new clinics, or develop innovative healthcare programs tailored to the specific needs of their communities. However, it's important to acknowledge that increased funding alone will not solve all the challenges facing Native American healthcare. Systemic issues such as poverty, lack of access to education and employment opportunities, and historical trauma continue to contribute to health disparities. Addressing these broader social determinants of health is crucial to achieving lasting improvements in the well-being of Native American communities. The Supreme Court's decision regarding Native American healthcare funding holds broader implications for U.S. health policy, potentially influencing how the government fulfills its obligations to marginalized communities and addresses healthcare disparities. The ruling sets a precedent for upholding treaty rights and underscores the government's responsibility to provide equitable access to essential services. The decision could have ripple effects on other areas of federal Indian law, potentially strengthening tribal sovereignty and reinforcing the government's trust responsibility. It could embolden tribes to assert their rights in other areas, such as education, environmental protection, and economic development. Furthermore, the ruling could inspire renewed calls for healthcare justice for other underserved populations in the United States. The decision highlights the importance of addressing health disparities and ensuring equitable access to healthcare for all, regardless of race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status. Ultimately, the long-term impact of the Supreme Court's decision will depend on how the ruling is implemented and enforced. Whether it marks a turning point in U.S. health policy or becomes a footnote in history remains to be seen. However, the decision undoubtedly represents a significant moment in the ongoing struggle for health equity and justice for Native American communities.